What's the payback?
I do not have that information available.
So that's,
I think it's just under 2 years. We get all the money back on the electric bill. It's crazy. Well, Randy, what's the payback?
I think it's 6 to 7.
6 to 7. Wow.
so that's not part of the bond proposition, obviously.
It is not, no.
If I might, we went back and forth on where to put that. If it's part of the big package, which is going to be much harder to get from the state because of the size of the money, we had it in the Carlson Center package in a larger number, as part of that package. Then we took it out and put it back in, and now we have it out again because there is some interest, I think, in Juneau potentially for some small projects where they could toss us some change without funding millions of dollars. And so here's an opportunity for them to do that.
Next project, again, this one's been on the list for multiple years, and it's starting to address the ADA and the equipment replacement projects at all of the playgrounds within the borough. The next project is something we started talking about last year, and it's looking at the future of the aquatics program in the Fairbanks area. And this is a plan where eventually a new aquatic center would replace our 2 swimming pools in the Fairbanks area. Juanita Helms Administration Center, it's a 35-year-old building at this point, and this project is really to try to catch up to how we operate and use the facility today. It's grown over time, but the building has not kept up with how we use it. So, Transit Garage Phase 2, additional local match. So we've already appropriated quite a bit of local money. We have a Phase 1 grant from the FDA. We're applying for a Phase 2 grant right now. We applied for a Phase 2 grant last year. We did not receive that, but we did appropriate the match. This current Phase 2 grant application, based on the soil conditions since last year that we've discovered, and as we developed the project, the grant application request is a little higher, and so it will require a little bit additional, about $1 million additional local funding for match. Westcott Swimming Pool major maintenance, and this is part of the plan we started developing last year as for the aquatics program as it moves forward. The new aquatics facility in the Fairbanks area does not address aquatics in North Pole, and so this would be to upgrade and maintain that facility to keep aquatics out in the North Pole area. Next one, borough office building and land acquisition. This is really a placeholder as we move forward and we start reconfiguring this facility to accommodate the current needs. It also takes into account that Hager Road West, our office space that currently houses air quality, emergency operations, and part of animal control will be going away as the Phase 2 transit garage expansion project happens. So we know coming up in the future years we will need additional office space. We currently plan to lease that, but that's not the long-term plan. At some point we need to develop and decide where we're going to house the rest of our employees. And the last project on the list is the school district project, which is the Phase 4 Barnett. It was a big discussion as we put together the bond projects this year. As you know, it did come off of the bond ballot initiative, but it's still, as we've heard many times, a high priority for the school board and high priority for the school district administration. And they will be, the school board and or administration will be attending a future capital projects and legislative priorities committee meeting and can discuss more of their priority at that time. But we left it on the list because they definitely expressed to us that it is a high priority. That's all of the projects we have.
Mayor?
So in reviewing this, I think the public is going to understand a lot of it. The only thing that's on here, I think that's really a hot potato, and I'm sure you guys are well aware from recent discussions regarding our side. The game plan for swimming pools currently would be to try to keep Westcott Pool going long-term. There's no closing date on the horizon, and just keep working on it. for a couple of reasons. It's the best pool condition-wise right now, and it's going to require the least amount of money to keep it going. And it's the only pool we have in North Pole, and because of this distance separation, it seems, I'm sure we would get a huge public outcry if all the swimming pools were in town. And there was only one in town, and everybody had to come to Fairbanks. I think there's enough population out there, particularly with F-35s coming in, that's going to grow. So we need a pool out there, and it is our best swimming pool. Replacing the two in town with an aquatic center is the cheapest over a 10-year period, the cheapest alternative. And it's an upgraded service because we will upgrade technology, it'll be more efficient to operate from a maintenance perspective, from a utility perspective, and a staffing perspective. And so, we've run the numbers, and this is a math equation for us, and not putting value on seniors liking cozy Mary Sy, which I hear on a regular basis, that a big swimming pool doesn't suit them. Well, I think we can design something that might suit them, and they can be part of the design process. This was the exact same concern they had in Juneau that Yuri might be familiar with too. The seniors thought they would enjoy an aquatic center, and they do now that they have one. And it gets incredible use by seniors. So I know there's fear on this, and I know we'll get pushback when people see it, but that's the logic that we're bringing forward, and looking at the numbers. This is the cheapest way to go. And it's the highest level of service for our community, because the new pool can have amenities that there's no way we can possibly add to Mary Sy and Hammy if we try to keep those pools going. They're not large enough to add water slides and those sorts of things. So this cost is less, and it's a huge upgrade in theory. We can put a lot of amenities into it that we don't have right now. And things like the weight room, get it separated air handling wise and whatnot from the natatorium and longevity on equipment. I mean, just on and on. It's kind of a no-brainer in our mind, but then we're taking that emotional aspect of the user group out there out of our equation. What we are running, though, is the math on the number of users, and Mary Sy is the least utilized facility in our inventory, so, and the most expensive to operate. That's kind of, that's why to us it's a no-brainer, the way the numbers pencil out. So that's why it's here the way it is, and I still think it's the way to go on it, and I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us to engage the senior community in planning and design of a new facility to get there and try to get some trust from them that they'll be engaged going forward, and we don't want to build something that they don't like. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that's all good. I've got a couple of questions. So you say it's cheaper in air quotes, and that's just because the initial cost is greater, but when you take it over 10 or more years, the annual cost in comparison to the maintenance is less.
Because while this is $35 million, which is slightly higher than the replacement cost of Hammy and Mary Sy put together, the discussions from the Mary Sy people, they weren't rolling the Hammy numbers in, and they couldn't figure out how $35 million was cheaper than $13 million for Mary Sy. But we're not, again, it's both facilities. So you put both those numbers together, and it comes to 34, 33 and change or whatnot. So it's slightly higher number. But if we were trying to maintain Hammy and Westcott, we're going to dump a lot of money into that, like huge sums of money, regardless of what this engineer report comes back with. Certainly that'll fine-tune how much we have to put into Mary Sy, but we're familiar enough with the building and looking at the current maintenance costs on it that regardless of what the number from the that we get here in a few months comes back at it, that's only going to tell us how deep the hole is. we know we have a hole. And we don't care if it's $1 million short or $5 million short. It's short, and it's going to be. Long-term, this is the cheapest alternative. Particularly with operating costs going forward, the new aquatic center in Juneau is much cheaper to operate than what our pools currently are. So we're going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars in utility bills, and then also in staff costs every year going forward. And it's only going to take a few years. That's why, so when you look at 10 years, this is going to be the cheapest equation.
Thank you. So, and the Westcott and Hammy are their twin pools. Westcott has a slide. Does it not have diving boards then, or how does it? Because you said that they don't fit, or it wasn't large enough. But if they're the same size,
they are the same size. They have different activities in them, and competitive swimming, and different configurations within the same space in the pool. We use them a little bit different, and we can only get one slide in. We're limited on space for slides. So doing the kinds of things that go with the slides, we're much more limited to the point of saying you really kind of can't do it. It would make it impossible to do the major swim competitions we do at Hammy. We need the deck space for like state championship type swim meets and whatnot. We hold small meets out at Westcott, but the big meets are at Hammy.
okay, thank you. So, I mean, that took us through our major maintenance, energy improvements, and capital improvements. Unless we have other, do you have questions or discussion at the moment?
I don't have questions.
Yeah.
I got a quick question. The transit garage and the warm storage, are they related? Don't the buses park?
No, they're not related.
Oh.
The warm storage is for emergency equipment, so it's not related to the transit garage operation. They do have warm storage in transit where they store their buses, but these are two separate things.
So the, maybe you could speak to the rationale on your ranking, and it's changed a little bit from last year. I think some of it's fairly obvious, but I mean, in terms of, because this list is in a prioritized order.
No, it is not.
Oh, it's not, okay.
No, they're all bullet pointed, so, and as last year and most years, the committee themselves is the one that does
Sure.
the ranking. And so, so we didn't want to influence that at all by putting it in a priority list.
So the document that comes out of here that we refer to the assembly will be prioritized, and it bears a lot of resemblance to the order that it happened to be last year, so, okay. Thank you.
Maybe just a little perspective on just the state, where the state will be coming from in January. I mean, the variables are, of course, who's running the administration, and the size of the earnings reserve that is now being used for various services and potentially can be a source for capital projects in the future. I know that without having gone without capital budgets the past few years, not only the state but other, of course, most communities have a backlog, and there's pressure to figure something out in terms of capital budget. And then, of course, the revenue question, I think, will be back before the legislature, but it depends on who's on the third floor.
And you're implying there's significant variation in what money we might see available depending on who the governor is.
Yeah, well, so the budget that comes forward will be written by the current governor, and whether or not he retains that seat, there'll be 6 weeks to either keep it or change it. And of course, it'll be the legislature's document, but now that they have past this political problem of issue of using the earnings reserve for government services. There's a big balance in there, and if that balance continues, then I suspect there'll be more, over time, there'll be more willingness to use it for capital projects. And of course, another variable, where is oil, that sort of thing.
Okay. The change in the size of the earnings reserve, or the change in the increase in the earnings reserve, is based on market forces or stock prices for the most part? I mean, is that the majority of the?
Yeah, it'll depend on the performance of the assets that it invests in, and of course how much. So, for example, this year they're drawing about $3.8 billion from it. In this current fiscal year, they're going to use it for government services. They're going to use it to pay the dividend, and they're going to use it to, appropriate money from the earnings reserve back into the principal, inflation proofing, as they've called it. And so those three things are just under $4 billion. There are proposals out there from two of the candidates to propose actually paying full dividends, paying past dividends even, and so those would be large chunks of money that would presumably come out of that fund as well, which would impact people's perception of the health of it going forward and ability to fund, capital projects.
What kind of dollars are we talking about there?
For
Fund full dividend and pay off the last couple of years of shortfall.
So, I guess as a rule of thumb, you can think of it in terms of so this year, next month, $1,600 will be the dividend. A full dividend by the statute would have been $2,900 or change. So you can think of it in terms of every $100 you get in the dividend is about $67 million in cost. So in order to fund the full dividend this year, you need another $800 or $900 million. There's nowhere for that to come from other than the CBR, which is a tough vote, or the earnings reserve. So if you add up what was lost or what was not paid out, it's about a $3 billion payment if you paid 18s dividends, 17s, and 16s, all of which have been reduced in some way. So that's about $3 billion.
$3 billion.
You would have to reach in and use to make everybody whole, I suppose. And then going forward, of course, the overall structural deficit right now is still $700 million. That's with the money they're using for government services and the permanent fund. The structural deficit increases by another, it doubles if you start going back to that old formula, or if you don't, change the way it's used. And so a $1.7 billion structural deficit is a real problem, because even a significant income tax will raise maybe $600 or $700 million. So you could propose an income tax, and you're still in a big hole if you're paying up full dividends. Ultimately, anybody in the governor's office or any legislature, their hands are tied ultimately by how much is in that fund.
So, under the current system, a significant sales tax would come close or close that structural gap?
The only sales taxes that have been talked
Or,
about.
I'm sorry, excuse me, income tax.
Income taxes.
Thank you.
An income tax, a sizable income tax, so the first one the governor proposed 3 years ago would have generated about $700 million. Okay, and this last one from earlier this year, what was proposed was a payroll tax, which would have raised maybe half of that.
Okay.
Because it was capped. It was capped at what the dividend would be.
Well, we didn't discuss the programmatic stuff in as much detail last week. I mean, we did go over it, but we could should we have a discussion on that? Mayor, do you have any report on this, or?
I don't, did you want to add anything on that at all? I don't. Yep.
I can just go over what the changes were from the last time. So, just a couple clarifying points. I did talk to air quality. They did request that we keep these on, knowing that with the fiscal climate, there may be some challenges in getting the $2 million for the appliance exchange. You'll also see some stricken language based on feedback. These are items that are either closed or completed, or just may not need to be included this year that were included last year. I did add some language on PACE, on the PACE section on the bottom of page 2, which I noticed there's no page numbering. My apologies.
Hey, Brittany, before we move on, just on the, so we have a topic in support of CPACE and the on-bill financing. And then on the front page, we also have the third paragraph dealing with residential heating, or a loan program, or financing of conversions through HFC. So the idea is the idea to create another option for financing the conversion program, not just, which right now we would only have the on-bill financing, which is dependent on the utilities partnering with other financial institutions or others to raise the money to then loan out. But so we're looking for a second alternative for residential loans, right?
So my recollection from our last meeting is this was something IGU had recommended for inclusion last year. Whether that ended up being taken care of through on-bill financing, or whether they're still recommending that, I can follow up and see what the status is on that. I don't know the answer to your question.
Yeah. So for the on-bill financing portion, it would be the utility
Right.
that would actually provide that financing, to partner with somebody, with some entity to then provide that, and then they would become the utility itself would be would actually administer the loan.
So I'll follow up with IGU and see what their thoughts are on that one, because I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, and the only reason I ask is if we take that down to then where does on-bill, where does it not work? Why do we not think that would work? Those kinds of
I
things.
hear you.
Since we might have people saying, well, didn't we deal with this? So. And it may be because on-bill, maybe it's more expensive than what HFC can provide.
Okay. I'll follow up. In talking with David Gibbs, we are striking just any 911 topics for this coming year. There may be some work on next generation 911, which is allowing the 911 system to accept text and video and other types of images more streamlined through the 911 system. However, the state is just starting to get some movement on that, and it's not likely to see much, so that would be more of taking a support role if it moves, otherwise just kind of letting it develop for right now. I did include some language from Sally regarding the State Healthcare Authority. Unfortunately, I don't know if there's anybody here that is able to speak on that one.
I can if you'd like. So this was an initiative being pushed by the OMB director, and that all came to a halt about a month ago. So the meetings that were planned that Sally was going to attend last month, and then again here I think this week or next, were canceled. There are political reasons for the cancellation of that, because of some pushback the administration's received from some key groups. So I think they're probably waiting until November to begin pushing it again.
Okay.
So there have been discussions, AML discussions, and it's still brewing, and it is going to pop back up again. Locally, we've got two different opinions. Our opinion, the boroughs, is that we think it's a wonderful program for a lot of communities, but not us, because we handle our health care better than other people in the state, and our costs are cheaper. our costs will go up if this program was initiated and we had to join it. So we're supportive of a program being created because most people in the state would benefit from it, but it needs to be optional there has to be an opt-out clause available for municipalities, that we're not mandated to have every municipality join, okay? And it is a great program for the smaller communities, they would save money, and it's a good way to do it, economy of scale for them. But because we're managing our program so much better than others, we're cheaper than depends on how the new program is put together, but there's no scenario that would save us money that we're aware of at this point. And we would save a lot of money with our own program under some of the scenarios. So that's the borough's position. The school district here wants to just say no, they don't even want it to get started. They don't want the state to get their foot in the door with it because it would cost them more money also. And they don't think that just having an opt-out clause right now, that makes them nervous that then next year they would take away the opt-out clause. Okay, so they want to just say no, so that you guys, because you guys will make our official position, but our administrative position is we could go along with it because it benefits so much of the state to do something like that.
And our administration is in the same pool as the district employees, is that right?
They're separate.
No, the healthcare is
Separate
separate.
plans. Okay.
We administer both, but they're separate plans.
So the other ones that I had changes to from last week's document was community assistance. The administration recommends taking a position on that item and taking a support role. Sales or income tax, this is
Just on that community assistance, so the balance in that fund right now is 90 million. So it's half of what it originally was at, 180.
You said 9 or
It's
90?
90 million. So the statute is 1/3, I guess, shared with communities each year, so 30 million. So for this next budget cycle, there is 90 million in there. So, we can support that. There was additional money in the PCE fund last year, which was appropriated in. And if that PCE fund does well again in this next year, then it'll be shored up again. So anyway, just comment.
Okay. The next one is sales or income tax and whether the assembly should take a formal position. Also, under this item is the recent Wayfair decision that is causing discussion regarding sales tax throughout the state and whether a state-level sales tax model needs to be implemented in order to collect funding from internet sales. So that's a conversation that's taking on throughout the state. It's percolating through AML and Alaska Conference of Mayors. I'm sure the Management Association also took a look at it. So that's something that we recommend taking a look at and potentially taking a position on, and a sales capital budget. There are a couple other items that I skipped around on. Those were ones that I specifically made changes over the last couple days based on last week's meeting. So starting at the top again, for the $2 million of the heating appliance exchange program, right now the air quality has expended about $8.8 million in change outs, but the scale of our problem is estimated at about over $40 million. So any additional help, I did confirm with the air quality, they would appreciate it if we could get it. We also talked about supporting, moving on to the next item, we talked about supporting ADEC's budget in regards to the air quality division to make sure that they are fully funded or increase funding. We work with them very closely and want to ensure that they're fully staffed and able to help oversee the air quality program. We talked about the residential heating conversion program. Thank you, Yuri. School bond debt reimbursement is one that's a carryover from a prior year. There's not much that I know about some of these other ones, so if you have questions on PERS or the Public Records Act or the revolving loan certification or clarification, or the retainage interest, those are ones I would not be able to answer. Removal of marijuana from the schedule of controlled substance was something that came over from prior years. And state professional licensing reciprocity has come up multiple times in regards to specifically allowing military spouses to enter their trades or professional fields in a more streamlined and faster timeline.
Didn't Kawasaki try to put something forward last year on this? That Scott had on professional licensing for military spouses.
So, yes, there are a number of. It seems like every cycle there's some sort of a reciprocity issue, and I think with this statement, there's a lot of different professional licensing depending on profession, and the various boards, medical, nursing, and hairdressers,
Yep,
and everything
teachers,
else.
yeah.
Right. So I don't know the statute well enough to know if there can be a blanket change that impacts across all professions, for military, or if you have to go into each profession. I suspect it's the latter. I suspect the bill itself would be relatively thick, so what that would indicate is there would be a lot of different people to communicate with, and
There's a group in town, if I understand it correctly. There's like a group of military spouses, I believe, who have professional licenses, lawyers, social workers, whatever it might be. I think that meet specifically just to kind of help each other out with some of this. I don't know the name of the group, and the lady who I know who participated in that, she's since moved on. She worked for us as an attorney, but
So our Tiger team's working on this and has been working on it for some time, and it was brought up in our growth management plan for Eielson, and there is state statute that says that you can do this. However, it's not working, and every time we've run this into the mill, it's come back that state statute requires that. The language is kind of funky. I've read it a couple of times. I don't know if Jill's just
I
pulled it
can
up.
read you the language, yeah. So it basically says a department or appropriate board can issue a temporary courtesy license to the spouse of an active duty member of the armed forces if the spouse applies to the department or appropriate board in the same manner prescribed by them. So basically they have to go through the application process. I think my understanding from talking to Jeff after we all kind of informally met last week was that it didn't go far enough as far as prioritizing or doing it on an expedited basis, and so it's up to the individual licensing board or whatever to establish that process. There's nothing requiring them to do it in a certain way. And then he did follow up on Representative Kawasaki's bill. It was House Bill 262, which was titled Military Spouse Courtesy Licenses, and it passed out of the House, but then it never got out of Senate Finance. So I do think they want according to Jeff, DOD wanted more than just the temporary courtesy license. They want the expedited basis, and they want some prioritization language in there.
So, yes, all of that. The statute allows this to happen, but doesn't require it to happen, and people aren't doing it. And the ones that are doing temporary licenses, they're so short, they're temporary for such a short period of time that isn't functioning well. So we really need more of a dive on this, because it's stalled a couple of times because we've gotten information back. I think it might have been Cogla's office a year ago, said, oh no, we don't have to deal with it because it's done. And then we ran it back into the mill again after that. So we've taken a couple charges at it, and it's a pretty complicated issue because there are so many different kinds of licenses. But it is a big issue for both installations and the spouses. I mean, it's really huge. And the costs to get a temporary license for a short period of time, they're requiring, like for a teaching certification, you might get a license for a year, but they're charging such an astronomical amount of money, it's not worth it. So you want to get the full license, it's good for whatever, but then you're only going to be here for 2 years, and it's not worth it to get the full license. So we got people trapped in this equation, and we don't have a good answer for it yet. We need more work on it. Murkowski's office has been taking a look at it, but they got stalled at one point because they were told, "Oh no, it's fixed. Here's the language. You can do this." Well, yes, you can, but we're not. Is the problem? Okay. So I'm not sure where we go on that. It's still an issue that needs to be worked on because it's not totally resolved.
Okay. Well, we could take their draft and try to turn it into a draft that we can float around and see if Anchorage would want to join in. And because, this is the kind of thing where you get into these turf battles, where you got the Denison town say, "Hey, now."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's happened before.
What about Kodiak with the Coast Guard too? I mean, they're not technically under the DOD umbrella, but they would have the same issue anywhere else that would have Coast Guard stations even.
I would think they would be supportive.
Homer, Kodiak, Juneau, Sitka,
Yeah.
Ketchikan.
Yeah. That would at least broaden the aperture a little bit in terms of interested parties,
It's going to be a tough one because many of the licensing agencies feel threatened. That they're going to get these people coming in that really aren't qualified. They're going to have a big influx, and then their existing people will get pushed out of work by, these temporaries coming in and whatnot. So there's a fear associated with it, with a number of the different licensing groups.
The problem is, though, just look at social workers, right? Like, that's a common profession amongst military spouses, and it's a big need in Alaska. And most of them have to go through lots of hoops at other, New York can have some strict rules for licensing of social workers, and then, so I guess we could always do there's lots of great ways where you could probably show where it would actually close some critical gaps in professionals.
Well, here at Fairbanks, we have lots of docs and nurses, thanks to the military, from Bassett that come over and stay.
I think there's a group of states, I forget how many, that have automatic reciprocity, just period. So if you're licensed in one of them, you're licensed in all of them. I don't know if something like that would fly here either, if we would want to join them. But that could be helpful. I think there's 13 states in the group that do that currently, but I could be mistaken.
Has the Tiger team, Jeff or anybody's had any conversations with Janie Hovenden in Juneau? She runs licensing for the state.
I don't know if Jeff's chatted with her. I
can give her a call just to see, if she's aware of any, this issue. Maybe she can point out some things. Let me give her a shot.
Any more discussion or questions on legislative and programmatic funding priorities draft for 2019?
Refresh my memory. The ceasing the school bond debt reimbursement, that had a sunset on it. They were doing that for 3 years, 5 years?
It's a 5-year moratorium.
It was a 5-year.
Yeah, so not this session, but next session for the fiscal year 2021, it'll be back on the table. And if they don't do anything, it'll be, municipality. So if we get through the session in 2020 and nothing changes, then that fall, municipalities would be able to go for it and be able to get a 50% participation from the state.
I've got one on the State Health Care Authority. Could you please explain to me the rationale in taking the lead role, or I guess I could speculate, is it so that if we take the lead role, we can maybe ensure that there is an opt-out? The reason I ask is because it's clear that it's not something that we have interest in pursuing anytime in the foreseeable future for our borough. It's, it's great to be a good neighbor and other people can benefit from it. So if it wasn't for that opt-out thing, I would think that it would be something that's more of like a supporting role, especially since it's not something that we'd be interested in participating in. But what is the rationale behind it? The recommendation of lead on this item.
Well, Sally and I participated in a conference call with Pat Pitney and some other folks because we want to make darn sure that there's this opt-out clause. And the other people that are working on this don't want to see that, because pulling us into the pool makes the pool bigger and lowers their costs. Especially since we're healthier, so to speak, and have wellness programs and whatnot functioning. And so I think we need to stay engaged because it will, otherwise the majority of the rest of the state is kind of pushing on this. So, I guess it's a strategy question. I'm not sure the best answer, but we have been engaged and we have stalled it a couple of times where the folks in Juneau working on it have stopped and backed up a little bit from where they were going because they really would like our support. Because Sally and I were pretty adamant that it doesn't work for us the way you've got it written.
Okay. Thank you.
So, look, and the history is we killed the concept in 2013 when it was brought forward. Actually, it was a Senator Dunleavy bill. And then the concept got wrapped into Senate Bill 74, which was the Medicaid reform, as a study and as a plan, which is really where we are now with the administration trying to push this forward.
We have a couple of meetings still before we need to send this to the assembly, so we don't need to take any kind of recommendation action today. We can.
Correct. You have to deliver it to Finance Committee by October 15th by code. It's your prerogative, the committee's prerogative, if they want to rank it now or rank it at all. And we anticipate having the school district here at the next meeting.
Great. And then when do you know when we might have Andrew as well?
He gets back this early next week, so he should be back for the next meeting.
Okay. Well,
When is the next meeting?
September 20th.
Okay, that's right.
So it would
is
be.
right there.
And Angela, you.
Sorry. We didn't. Did we set a time? We didn't set a time. We were just setting the dates, so that's open. So we can send an email after the meeting.
So and we can talk about this as well, Angela. But my inclination at this point would be to take these materials and the information from this meeting and our previous conversations and let Andrew also get this and digest this, and then hear from the school board next week, or rather on the 20th, and then have amendments and revisions and a recommendation at the following meeting for the 11th. Is something how I would see this?
Sounds right.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think it's good to have Andrew be a part of
Okay.
that
Great.
session. Yeah.
So unless there's anything else, I think that might conclude agenda item number 2, our discussion and possible recommendations.
Just to clarify, Mr. Quist, so we anticipate meeting on the 20th and going to the Finance Committee on the 4th, but it doesn't have to be, the resolution doesn't have to be final. Just the list has to be delivered.
Okay.
And then it would go to the Assembly. I don't know, the 11th or the 25th.
Well, it sounds like it will need to be the 25th. Or maybe
You're
we
gonna
could.
meet on the 11th. So this is a new concept. This 3-meeting system is a new concept from the administration this year. We haven't quite worked through it yet. Do you have Jim's email? The email? Okay. So really, it's open just so long as it gets to the finance committee by October 4th.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that, we can do this on email later too, but it seems like we'd want to have a recommendation from this committee before the 5th. So we still need to have 2 meetings before then. So this 11th date might be a little late.
Correct. And the new idea is typically we've finalized the resolution and delivered that to the finance committee. But the idea is we're just getting a list and we can finalize it after. This committee can still do work after it delivers it to the finance committee. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure, and then our deadline then to send it to the assembly is the 15th.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, maybe then that brings us to agenda item number 3, suggestions for future agenda topics. And before we jump into this, I requested to add this to the agenda simply because since this is a committee of only 3 individuals, Angela and I, or Andrew or I mean, we can never discuss this, so we can never bring things forward or have a conversation about something we might possibly want to talk about. And so I thought that it would be appropriate to put on the agenda, and so I would open that up at this point if we have any recommendations or suggestions for future agenda items for this committee.
Yeah, so other than, right, I think the goal next month is next meeting, is to do the prioritization, at least prioritize the capital projects list. So, yeah, I have nothing further to add.
Sure. Yeah, I agree at this point. I think we've got something set. I would be inclined to keep something like this or something like this on the agenda if there's no reason that we can't do it. And then maybe looking at our meeting after next and potentially having some things then. And sort of I feel like this committee, we're refining things, but there's still maybe a little bit of, I think soul searching is maybe too dramatic a phrase, but like I think we still, I guess I'm vaguely of the opinion that we could do more with this committee, particularly with legislative priorities. We've had lots of things coming from the assembly recently in terms of resolutions and such, and it seems like there could be more process and more public process involved with that. Anyways, I'll say that for another time, but I'm glad that that's an agenda item now. All right, so that'll bring us to item also number 3, item 4, committee comments. Ms. Major.
I have no comments at this time.
Okay, I don't have much of a comment. I'm happy that we're all here and that we will be meeting again sometime on September 20th with a time to be set. And hopefully looking forward to have a full committee then as well. So if there isn't anything else, I think that we can adjourn at 12:10. Thank you.